Hey folks, Amy here again. Welcome back to the Business of Yoga speaker series. I am really chuffed and a little bit starstruck today to be talking with Rod Stryker. Welcome, Rod. Thanks for sharing your time so generously with us.
Thank you, Amy. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, yay, me too, a lot. And as we were just saying before we got underway officially, everyone who's been reading your book in my book club will be really excited to hear everything that you have to share as well. So particularly grateful to have you as a guest. So folks, I'm just going to read out Rod's bio because he's got a fabulous one, and I'm sure you'd like to learn a little bit more about him if you're not completely familiar with him already. So Rod Stryker is the founder of, oh Rod, how embarrassing, I was going to check with you the pronunciation of this. Para or para?
Para.
Para. It's hard with this Aussie thing to appear respectful. Yeah. Para Yoga and the author of The Four Desires, this amazing book, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity and Freedom. He has taught for more than 35 years, I want to know about that, dedicating his life to improving lives through his lectures, writing, creativity, leadership, service and family life. After decades of study, intensive practice and an apprenticeship with internationally renowned yoga masters, Rod founded Para Yoga to create a resource for the time-tested wisdom of the yoga tradition. As a part of Para Yoga's master training program, which I want to talk about as well, he recently launched one of the most comprehensive online yoga teacher trainings in the world, renowned for his depth of knowledge, practical wisdom, and unique ability to transmit the deepest teachings to modern audiences. Rod is a leading spokesperson for living a life of purpose, fulfillment, and freedom on two fronts. One, he offers accessible wisdom and practices to wide audiences, those who simply want to live more joyfully and effectively. And he's also the leading authoritative source for experienced students and teachers of yoga and meditation. Rod is a mentor to hundreds of teachers and thousands of students worldwide. Like I said, what a fantastic bio. It's a real honor to have you as a guest.
I'm glad it's not any longer. We wouldn't have any time to talk.
Not at all. I imagine that you've earned every word of it. So tell us a little bit, first of all, about, I know I've read your bio, but it just skims the surface of a long period of time of work, of commitment, of practice. So tell us, how would you describe what your yoga business, if you like, is, what it's made up of these days?
Well, the business is I'm no longer teaching ongoing group classes. So primarily it's made up, there's several arms, I would say. So one, of course, is still continuing to teach on a public level. I continue to do workshops, retreats, and trainings, and as well as festivals. Those are probably festivals or conferences. Mm-hmm. Although all the conferences, what used to be conferences, are now generally festivals. Mm-hmm. So that's probably what makes up a good deal of it. Online content, my asana and yoga and meditation classes are on Yoga Glow, so something like 75 or something on there. Yeah. In fact, when I came to Australia and New Zealand, and it's now really part of the phenomena business of yoga business now, which is that there's an opportunity for people to study with you who you've never seen, let alone met. Yeah. But when I got to Australia and New Zealand, there were really quite a few just through the Yoga Glow classes, as well as something that you just mentioned and read about, which described, which was this online teacher training program that we developed over 5 years to get it to where we wanted it to be, and then launch it. We started launching it about a year ago. So that's that. And then there's writing and continuing to develop audio content. In the coming year, we'll take advantage of this medium a little bit more and do some more web conferencing thing. There's definitely a lot I want to share. Yeah. So it's practically everything you can imagine other than group classes on a regular basis.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Which a lot of people I know, and we'll talk more about this hopefully in a moment, a lot of people will be inspired by, for people that feel like, I love this now, but I can't see myself doing it forever, or what does my path look like over time, because my life is going to shift and change, or the people and the way I choose to share yoga is going to shift. So I think that's going to be heartening for a lot of people, that there is a whole lot of ways to be a yoga teacher outside of the weekly classes kind of situation.
It's a hard medium, and I mean, I have two thoughts about it. One is that I do think, they say that in 7 years' time, 99% of the cells in your body will be utterly new. So, for example, if you were a smoker or something, and if you stop smoking in 7 years, it will be 99% your body will not remember. There'll be no memory of actual smoking. There'll be no residue of it. So it's quite an extraordinary thought. At the same time, I think there's something important that at least every 7 years, and I would put that on the outside now. I used to say 7 years, that we think about how to reinvent ourselves as teachers. I think it's really vital. And you talked about it. In a sense, part of it is like just being sure that we're creatively being fulfilled. What I think of is that after you've taught group classes, say for 5 years or something, I think it takes 5 to 7 years to kind of really get skilled at it. And then what? And then you're really winding up teaching more or less a kind of similar agenda, similar approach. And I think that as time goes on after that 7 year, 5 years of vinyasa classes or regular ongoing classes, you're now using a relatively small percentage of your creativity, perhaps your intelligence. It doesn't require that you learn that much more and still be a good vinyasa or ongoing class teacher. So what it does, I think that kind of imperative or hunger that we have to not maintain it forever or to look to how to expand it is really part of a creative impulse, and that we should be expanding what we do and how we do it. What is the platform? And I'm quite happy over as time is passing more and more on to my students for them to teach and for me to step into new forms of creativity, just like I don't want them to step into new forms of creativity.
I love that. I think a pattern that I see too is that it's not just the method or the conduit that you share yoga, but there's also something in it. Maybe it's a similar sort of amount of time. I'm curious to know what you think, where it's also time to step up in the role of authority that you sort of take in the yoga community and become maybe not the teacher trainer, but the mentor, or assume a higher level of authority than the people coming up under. There seems to be a bit of it's not a hierarchy, but just maybe it's kind of earning your stripes that happens as well.
It is. It's matriculation. It's like you're maturing.
Yeah.
And reach a certain level of expertise, and then the idea. I'm always a little hesitant when I hear dubious when I hear about different yoga systems that say, "Don't study anything else." This is it. This system is complete. And it's really unfortunate when I feel that it's an unfortunate paradigm, because really what the truth is that there is no end point in yoga, and you naturally want and need to grow. I mean, I would say it's a spiritual imperative. And so the idea of, no, don't learn anything more than this system teaches is absurd. And at the same time, we have to, I think, by the nature of what yoga is actually doing to us, we want more. We want to expand.
Expansion.
And therefore, our level of expertise and how we share and what we share and what we step into should also be expanding. And, I think it's super vital. There's actually a saying in the Vedas, something like that, a person, and this is a little counterintuitive based on a lot of things that we've learned, which is the person who becomes content will never be happy. In other words, you should continue to grow.
Yes.
You should continue to seek your own evolution. And if you become too content, it leads to stagnation and unhappiness. Yeah. So it's a very counterintuitive idea. And especially, we may have learned Santosha being one of the young.
This is one of the things I love most about your teachings, is that sort of reclaiming some of the teachings within context, that we can pendulum swing way out there. I've got to hold it up again because I'm in love with it. Everything about this book and all of this, I'm always trying to talk to people about, no, there is desire in yoga, but this kind of like, you shouldn't want anything and you shouldn't have it. And I was at a lecture, a Bhagavad Gita lecture the other day, and that was all like, don't desire anything, blah, blah, blah. And I was saying, but making essentially, Rod, I'm sorry, but I was making your point about, if there's no desire, then how can there be practice? Like, you have to have the craving to. And I think I love the way that you make these points, that it's way more beautifully complicated and nuanced than know this, yes, that. Love that.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you've just languaged that point. I mean, yogis, I think if we're ultimately going to be content, we have to be able to live with nuance. And that there is no white or black. And I mean, the idea, and for those people who haven't read the book, I do present some fundamental ideas, not just that are, on the one hand, they're fully fleshed out in Tantra, but they're in the yoga system. I mean, there are parts, if I was at that lecture and I could have raised my hand, I might have pointed out that there are actually some parts of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna goes so far as to say in that text, he says, I am desire itself, when that desire is in line with Dharma. Yeah. So it's like God is desire. And this is just really fundamentally a fundamental idea. And I think if we really, again, I make that point in the book, but if we really try and eliminate desire, we're really going to confront a fundamental issue, which is what happens to our next breath. I would really like my next breath. What happens to our next breath? I'd really like a meal sooner or later. I'd really like to go to sleep. And it's about navigating the field of desire, which, as you said, is nuanced. Yeah. It's about, and even Buddha, makes this case for, it's not desire that's our downfall, it's clinging to desire. And he makes the case for righteous and non-righteous desire. It's actually, it's in that sense, helpful and unhelpful too. It's another way of thinking about it. Yeah. Yeah. I was a philosophy and psychology major in college. And I was a very serious, a bit glum, where I got really serious about yoga. And when I began to hear this message, the one I'm trying to share, the one we're actually touching upon, I heard it from teachers. I heard it from as these great, amazing master teachers, and they were profound practitioners, and their depth of meditation experience, you just got around them, and you could sense the depth and the richness of their own experience when their eyes were closed, and the depth of silence, etc. But they were great lovers of life. They had kids, and they loved food, and they loved life, and they laughed and they cried. So it was like really ultimately the best mentorship that this glum philosophy major could have gotten, which is that life is really worth celebrating, and if we don't celebrate it, we may be cutting ourselves off from life. Yes. And that's what makes us unique as human beings. And I see a lot of this confusion in the yoga world, and there's a lot of guilt about it. There's a lot of conflict about it, and so hopefully we're shedding some light on. There's really another point of view than you're going to hell if you have a desire for a piece of chocolate. Yes, yes. In fact, at this lecture, that's what it was, the piece of chocolate that he kept coming back to. And I think about my glumness as pursuing this sort of Theravadan path, and then discovering Anusara and going, oh, well, I can be happy. And I think John used to say I can be a pulsating bliss ball. Yes, please. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Could we talk a little bit about, this might be controversial, so ignore me if it's too controversial, but I'm interested in this teacher training that you've put together. You said you've spent 5 years doing the work to put it together. Well, let's start with that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because people will already be excited to know more. Yeah, I mean, the basis of it is this. I started teaching, I was there at the early years, the inception practically of Yoga Works in California. Mm-hmm. I don't want to take too egocentric a position on this, but the truth is that in Santa Monica, Yoga Works was it was 1987. Do I have that right? Yes, 1987, 88. And in many ways, that spun out a lot of what we know of today as vinyasa and as and the yoga that we practice. It's where Ashtanga got its kind of birthplace in the West. There was some it's clearly in Hawaii was a major place, but where it started becoming popular, where it started actually hitting the public was in this amazing spot. And if you go through that list, who the teachers that showed up for the next couple of years at that studio, you kind of have a who's who of the senior American teachers, at least. And then a lot of visiting teachers as well. Your accent reminds me of Shando Remedi, actually, a little bit. But I was there at the founding of their teacher training. So I started doing teacher trainings in I think we did that first one in, gosh, it was like 1990, I think. And then continued to do teacher trainings. And it was this singular phenomenon, you know, when you do teacher training, it has a tendency to be extremely horizontal, which is 8 limbs, hands-on adjustments, cues for asanas, a little bit of the yogas, maybe a little more of Yoga Sutras, something about history, and you're done. And it's this whirlwind of a lot of stuff, but not very deep. Mm-hmm. By the time, by 20 years later, no, not even that long. I'm thinking now is 1998 or so, or 7. So I'd been doing it for about 11 years. And at that point, I just felt like, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this horizontal, very kind of, I don't want to say superficial, but we're touching on a lot of things, but no opportunity to go deep. So I decided instead to model teacher training as a little bit more in an advanced context. And again, in those days, yoga was still quite new. So it was a little bit out on the outlier, on the edge there. Mm. But instead of doing a 200-hour in the traditional way that it was being done, or even a 300-hour, I decided to put together these modules where it was really what I would call vertical, much more deep in a single idea. So 5 days on Yoga Sutras, 40 hours on Yoga Sutras, 40 hours on Prana, 40 hours on the koshas, and 40 hours on Marma. So that became the model, and Kundalini and koshas and sutras and prana and tantra. And I decided that I would simply relegate or give the studios and stuff the opportunity to do the 200-hour. I wasn't interested anymore, mm-hmm. and instead focus on this. Mm-hmm. I didn't even call them teacher trainings. I call them Power Yoga master trainings. In the sense, it's time to step in. I mean, one of the challenges I think that we face as teachers once we start having to make a living from teaching is we start to direct so much of our life force and energy and time to teaching and making a living that we stop, or we kind of come to a point of where the very reason we got into yoga we start losing our way, which was we were seekers. Most of us were seekers. Most of us loved it. Most of us found that we were discovering parts of ourselves that we'd never seen before.
Yes.
But a lot of teachers, especially if they get popular quickly, stop having as much time to seek, to kind of answer. So that's really, as much as it was a teacher training, I kept that kind of behind the scenes. My main thing is, if you want to be a superlative teacher, be a superlative student. You have an opportunity to be a student in a deeper way. Mm. And I think most people would also acknowledge that at least a third, if not 40% of most teacher trainings are actually just filled with yoga students who want to learn more.
More about yoga. I totally agree.
They don't necessarily want to make a career out of it. Some do, and so it was really also to speak to them, to provide some really meaningful resource for them so they could jump in and start to explore these amazing principles and practices in a kind of curriculum-based way that was very systematic and very laid out. So that's the way I started doing teacher training more than 15 years ago. And in this, the first point we made, which is gradually this idea of how do you move on and what do you do? And I decided at a certain point that, you know what, I've now taught Vinyasa Krama, which is essentially the foundational course. I've now taught it 20 times over the last 15. No, I probably taught it 25, 30 times. I think it's time. I'm not going to teach it forever. And let's record it. Let's create a resource for it. Now, I'm a bit of a Neanderthal. I've already started to date myself with starting to teach in 1980 and all this kind of stuff. I'm actually turning 60 this year. So, you can't do everything for the rest of your life. There's an end point. And I thought, well, let's figure out how to possibly put this online. Now, the problem as a Neanderthal is this versus face-to-face, like what we're using now, this digital platform. Unlike millennials, and that's not unlike younger people who've had this interface much kind of a bigger part of their life.
Yeah.
This almost feels more real. And so for me, it was a little hard to conceive of, okay, are people going to receive the same level of transmission or the same level of interactivity, ultimately the same level of intensity and value from an experiential standpoint? And so it wasn't just kind of now beginning to figure out how to download in sizable chunks and what's the latest in terms of online learning research about how to communicate these ideas the best way to people. We did that part. But it was just generally a sense that the platform had to be like state of the art. So the platform took almost 2 years to design.
Wow.
We jumped on the map and figured that out. And the beautiful part of this story, I guess, and I'm actually teaching a retreat right now here in Munich, outside of Munich. And there's at least 5 people who are doing the program. And they said, you know, I'm getting so much out of it. And I even meet people who have taken some of the courses live and are now doing them online. And they say I get more out of it online.
Wow.
Yeah, but part of it is you get to replay stuff, and there's well-placed opportunities to see how much people are retaining, and then the platform is, things are moving and notes are flashing, and you can type in your notes and find that timeline in the video. And so there's all sorts of opportunities in that way to ensure that students are actually receiving it. You know, unlike at one point I heard a description of my 5-day trainings were like fire hoses, you know, where
I get that vibe. I can imagine.
You're just getting pounded, you know, and then you leave, and there's this digestion, you know, an attempt to assimilate it all. Well, somehow, you know, this is one of the strengths of online training, is that you can really go at your own pace, repeat it as you need to, and then there are ways that we go ahead and make sure that you've retained what's really essential. You know, again, I think the big thing for me and my passion around this is studentship. And I think, since, you know, just to jump back to the business of yoga teaching for a second, in order for you to be empowered to actually have to be empowered to move and to evolve yourself as a teacher, you have to have greater and greater skill set. I don't think it's just a matter of, I'll do a different social media platform. Mm-hmm. I think you need chops. I think you need depth and breadth, reach of experience and stuff like that. And so that's always been my experience. And, you know, finally on this, interrupt me anytime you need to, Amy, by the way.
I'm loving it. Okay. In case you couldn't tell.
You know, it's actually a piece. I consider myself very fortunate that I started teaching long before social media, in as much as I got to do 15 years in relative obscurity. Relative. I was in Los Angeles and I was successful, but in a very, I mean, it's like to think about the reach of that universe in those days as compared to these days.
Yes.
But as a result, I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing studentship and seeking. And so for whatever that's worth, that made such a meaningful impression on me, and so has influenced who I am and what I do and how I teach. And I wasn't, you know, the idea, as I said to someone recently, I said, you know, the idea in 1980, this was when I started teaching, that you could be a professional yoga teacher was not an absurd idea, because it wasn't an idea.
I think Annie Carpenter said something like that to me, that it was just, what are you even talking about?
It wasn't even like, no, it was like, okay, I'm going to do this on the side while I'm waiting tables.
Yes,
you know, or whatever your career was going to be, the idea of a full-time yoga teacher. But the one thing that hasn't changed is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to make a living. As I say, you know, most yoga teachers pay rent. They don't have a mortgage, unless you have a partner who helped you put the deposit on the house. Most of the rent, you know, and to kind of be part of a middle or upper middle class work, you know, middle class in terms of our economic value of our success. It's a huge amount of work. And so what I would say is, for teachers to really thrive, they have to set themselves apart. And the way you set yourself apart is you study, you continue to study, and you study with this, you know, you find the best resources you can. Don't be compromising. Develop a personal practice, and those are keys. And then you can be self-reliant. Then you can really grow.
Yeah, I love that. The reason I asked about your teacher training was because I was interested to know, I guess, and you've just made this point really, that I hear from a lot of teachers, but I've done my teacher training, meaning my first ever 200 hours, and I don't know if I don't feel totally confident to go out and teach. And I think, well, that's probably a good thing because you've only learned 200 hours worth of, yugas of information. So I like that what you're saying, that keep learning. It's important to maintain that.
That should be the foundation. That should give you some sense of the vastness of it. Here's the good news: is if people finish a 200-hour and they feel like they don't know enough, the good news is you will have that feeling for the rest of your life.
Yes.
In other words, that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
There is no point, you've read every book on the shelf. You've cleaned out all the, spiritual bookstores and yoga and Veda and Tantra, Upanishad, and it just goes on and on and on. And there's no end to it. So welcome to the club. If you feel like you'll never measure up to really being able to hold all the information, but you can continue to build what you do have. That's for sure.
Yeah, I love it. I'm conscious of time. I don't want to keep you too long, but there is one. I've got one question in particular that I because you said that you've been teaching for 35 years more.
38, actually. Yeah.
And we've talked about how you've changed things over time and released things that you weren't right and changed forms, but you're still a yoga teacher. Full-time yoga teacher. How do you maintain, or what would you say to someone who's feeling like it's a lot of heavy lifting? How do you persevere when it might feel like, for people that are doing the running to studio, or because one of the things that I'm frightened of is that people lose their passion for yoga because the yoga teaching becomes onerous.
Yeah, I agree with you. Here's what I would say. I would say that every time I hit a wall, and I did hit walls. I mean, it didn't occur to me that I needed to move on from group classes or the endless back-to-back privates I was doing. And it only was when it started getting too painful that it started to occur to me, like, wait a minute, it's time to change. This doesn't feel, this is, to your point, this isn't fulfilling anymore.
Yeah.
But the greatest ally I had in dealing with that was I never lost a personal practice. And that's I think the pivot. I think that because there's two things. One is that you hit a wall because you're uninspired. You can't draw, there's nothing to draw from. Another is you hit a wall because something deep inside of you senses it's time to expand. It's that image of the potato that you put in with a few toothpicks, you put it in the pot in that jar, and then it grows. And at a certain point, if you don't transplant it, it dies because the roots have outgrown the container. And so one is that I don't have anything more to draw from. Another is you've outgrown your container. And for me, it was always the latter. But I've always had a personal practice. I thought your question was going to be a little different initially. I thought your question was to the point of how do you stay inspired? And I would have said, it's personal practice. I mean, 40 years later, I practiced for 2.5 hours this morning, an hour and a half of pranayama meditation, an hour of yoga, asana. And that's my life. That's my day. That's how every day starts.
So I'm curious to know just on that, do you think if you are a yoga asana teacher, does your personal practice need to be asana related or not? Because this is something else that I hear from people. They're finding that actually chanting is my thing, or pranayama is my thing, and I don't do yoga asana anymore, even though it's what I teach. What do you think about that?
Bravo. Bravo. So the fact is, once it's in your body enough, I wouldn't say walk away from asana completely, but the idea that when you started out in your early days and you were super pumped and motivated and you were doing these 90-minute classes and great, and you did them for 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. And now your deepest sense of connection is through chanting or through meditation and the like. I would say there's enough asana in your body that you can draw from it. I still do asana. One, because it helps me sit comfortably.
Yep.
Two, it helps me be healthy.
Yep.
And three, it helps me just stay stable in the midst of all the changes in life that are all coming at us all the time. So I wouldn't recommend an asana teacher give up asana entirely, but I don't think you have to do the 90-minute kick-ass hot yoga, vinyasa, ashtanga every day in order to teach ashtanga, hot vinyasa.
Yeah.
And I do, you have to respect. This is where Ayurveda comes into the mix and why it teaches us so much. It gives us an idea. The older we get, we have less vital force. We have less ojas is the actual word. And I remember speaking to Richard Freeman, who's one of the great Ashtanga practitioners in the West, and this was a few years back. And I said, Richard, do you really do second, third series every day in order, And he's almost 10 years older than I am. And he said, no, Ron, no.
That's
and it was a complete sentence. No. So I don't think you have to do it. I don't have to do the same practice I teach every time. So if I'm in front of let's say, Come to Wanderlust, and it's a nice, big, fairly young, dynamic group used to vinyasa.
Yep.
I don't have to do this heavy-duty vinyasa class in the morning. I do what I do to feel inspired and full and motivated and joyful. And then we do what we do. Then I share what I share. I guide them through a practice that will fulfill them. And I think in the beginning, a teacher you don't have the highest level of awareness of what your students are experiencing, so you do it.
Yes.
But after years of doing that now, you can feel the room, you can feel what they need, you can feel what they're doing, what you must do to help them. Do you have to do that identical thing in the morning? No. And I think it's important you don't. I think it's important that you fall from that as well. Yeah. No, it's a great question.
And a fantastic answer. Is there anything you want to say to what in conclusion, right? Any summary statements you want to tell us about? Anything else you've got going on? Open. Wildcard.
Sorry statements? No. Did you say sorry?
No, anything else that's happening that you want to tell us about?
Only in as much as, it's my big cutting edge of my passion right now, and I've just almost finished the book proposal and about to send it to the publisher, is Yoga Nidra, and a book on yoga.
Fantastic.
And, I mean, I'm really convinced that this is it's the next domain of yoga practice. Oddly, I just think that we are so fundamentally tired and wiped out and exhausted.
Yeah.
It's not just yoga teachers. And there really is, Yoga Nidra is beyond even a healing method. And I'm really excited to share that.
Yeah.
In a very, very soon, there'll be a big wave of audio content that'll be available online.
Cool.
Because I did a lot of research, and I come from a lineage that actually taught Yoga Nidra, but in a very unique way. It hasn't been shared a lot in the West. And there's at least 7 or 8 different aims for Yoga Nidra. And so I break those out one by one. And but in particular, I'm really excited to share this content and get yogis understanding. You can access the state of yoga and really ultimately just simply lie down.
Yeah. I'm excited about that. I remember when I first, because I started out as a kid in sort of Shivanandari type yoga, and Yoga Nidra was always part, and then the yoga was always there. And when I went to my first 200-hour teacher training, there was no one said anything at the end, and I thought, what's going on? So I love that, reclaiming Yoga Nidra. I love it.
Yeah, my first teacher was actually a student of Shivananda himself. Shivananda, not Vishnu Devananda, but Shivananda. And you're right. There was no Shavasana where they just let you space out. It was a very deliberate, systematic journey that just got deeper and deeper and deeper until you basically disappeared. And, that's when you became, what was that, a pulsing bliss ball?
Yes, that's right. The golden egg.
You are. Golden egg. I love it. Yeah, we love golden egg. That's an inside joke maybe, but more on that coming soon.
Fantastic, Rod. We'll all keep an eye out for it. I'm going to hold this up again because honestly, because it really helps me bang on about desire more with more legitimacy if I can refer to your work, Rod. So go get this, everybody. Thanks, Rod, for being a fantastic guest.
Excellent. And there's a workbook now that comes with
yes.
it, and the workbook really helps us navigate and keep you motivated moving through it. Yeah.
Okay, all of my people, let's do the workbook for one of our book clubs. That's going to be good.
Awesome.
Thanks, Rod.